All right, welcome everybody. This is the webinar for sentiment analysis in Alteryx 3 ways. My name is Paul Houghton. I'm a consultant here at the Information Lab. I've been with the guys for about 4 years, and there's my social profiles for anyone that wants to go and catch me. Paul.Houghton at the Information Lab, at Mulu Gamer on Twitter, and of course LinkedIn there as well. So what are we going to cover today? Right, today we're going to look at why should you bother with sentiment analysis? What's the point? What are the benefits that you can get from it? Let me make sure I mute all that stuff. It's going to be embarrassing. All right, mute. There we go. And then we're going to look at 3 different ways of doing sentiment analysis in Alteryx. First way is using an API. Second way is just using a lookup dictionary. And the third way is building your own custom model. So the first question we have is, what is sentiment analysis? And if you go away and you do a quick little Google, you can come back with this quote from Wikipedia, which is basically explaining that sentiment analysis is trying to take a comment, feedback, message that you might have and assign a score to it, whether it's positive or negative, based on your own parameters. Bottom line is, we're trying to work out is what they said, good or bad for me. And me could be an individual. It could be a company. It could be about a product. It could be anything that you want to have some context to. So where could you use it? What are some of the use cases and the reasons that you might want to do sentiment analysis? You could be things like trying to find out which individual people you should try and target for improving your service, because if they're your biggest detractors, you can help them out and make sure that whatever you're delivering is good for them, and then it's likely to be good for everyone else. You can find out what is the sentiment of your customers over time. Are they saying more good things about you, or are they saying less good things about you? Is it trending from a really bad public perception to a better one, or vice versa? So you can be proactive about what you're doing and make sure you're delivering for our users before they start really complaining, or try and turn those complaints into a positive message. So you can determine whether individual customer segments really like your product or not. So you can try and isolate down to particular customer profiles, customer types, particular regions, particular areas, and whether they've got a good opinion of you or a bad opinion of you. You can start finding out, are all your detractors based out of one particular area or not? You can also find out how individual customers are reacting to changes or updates you might have made to your product. So you've added a new feature or you've removed an old feature. Are people starting to complain about it, or are they happy to see that come through? And the final one you could do is try and identify the key people in your customer base that are either promoting or detracting from your product. So you can try and target individuals to make the biggest impact in the environment, in your community. So that's enough about why. I'm going to kick off now, and we're going to work in Alteryx for the rest of the session. And there are 3 things that we're going to look at. The first one is we can use Microsoft's cognitive services to just develop a really quick API check for trying to determine sentiment analysis. So using an external third party, and we can come back. Next one is I've downloaded and connected a subjectivity lexicon, and I'm just going to use that dictionary information, which is given a score to positive or negative values, for particular words and use that. The last one is we're going to use a custom built model using the R tools to try and work out, can we customize it to our own use case a lot better and get a final answer. All right, let's get into Alteryx. I'm going to open up now. All right, so you should see on my screen here, and I should note that one of the things that is happening here is I'm assuming a little bit of familiarity with Alteryx. This is I'd probably call it an intermediate level course, intermediate level webinar. So I am assuming a base level of understanding and base level of how Alteryx works. So if we look at my folder, I have in here a series of individual reviews on IMDb. I have a folder full of negative reviews, right? So they're listed out 1 to 100, I think I've got here. Yep, with a number of 1, 2, or 3 next to it, and that's the review score that it got on IMDb. I also have a folder full of positive reviews. So what I've got here is what's called a labeled list of reviews. All right, the ones where it's 7, 8, 9, or 10 are labeled as a positive review. 1, 2, or 3 are labeled as a negative review. All right, so I've got a labeled list to reference against. So I'm going to go back to Alteryx, and I just want to read all those individual files into my workflow. Okay, so I'm going to go File. I'm going to navigate over to that folder. Open this folder. There we go. So I'm going to bring in my first text file. Now, because it's not a default data type, it's a text file, I need to tell Alteryx how to read it in. So I'm just going to read it in as a delimited file, but I'm not going to have any delimiter for it. Right? So it's just going to read it all into a single cell and bring it in that way. Also, it doesn't contain any field names, so it's just going to give it a default name of field 1. Right? So the first one that we're looking at is from the negative folder, number 3, and entry number 0, and it's the story of a man who has unnatural feelings for a pig, which is a really interesting starting review, but that's okay. But each of our individual files are individual reviews, so I want to do 2 things. First thing I want to do is I want to return the full path of where that file is, right? And by doing that, I can find out what the file name is, so I've got a record for it, and I can find out what the sentiment of that is, because that's labeled in the folder. So I need to bring that information into my workflow. So when I run my workflow now, I've just run it by hitting Control R. All right. So 2 things have happened. First thing is my input data has truncated my record. So if I zoom in, that's what I should have checked. Oop, there we go. Oh, I don't think it's going to zoom in. That's unfortunate. Let's grab my pointer. There we go. So if we zoom in and look at the input errors, it's just telling me field 1 hasn't read everything in. It's more than 254 characters. So I need to return to my input and increase the length. I'm just going to make it really big. So this is 254,000 characters long now instead of 254 characters long. That should fit everything in for me. Let's run that one again. And I now have my field 1. Ooh, still, oh no, that's just in the cell. All right, no warning message this time. We can go back, and I now have my file name. Okay. There's a couple of things that are happening here. First thing is I actually want to read in everything. Right, so rather than just the single file, I want to read in all my files. So I'm going to use a wildcard in Alteryx. I'm just going to replace the file name with that wildcard of a star. And I'm also going to, rather than read in the negative folder, I'm just going to use what's called a relative path. Right? And using that relative path option, I can read all my subdirectories, which is option number 3. Okay, reset that detail because I've updated the file information. Now when we run it, what happened there? Why has that not worked? Didn't check my read subdirectories. There we go, apply that this time. And this time we're reading in all 200 files. Okay. So we end up with 123 files read, 224 records. Ooh. And the first thing is, in my folder, I actually created this a text document for just recording any questions that anyone might have. So I just want to filter out those two. So I'm going to grab a sample. Wrong sample. I want to go preparation, and we want to do select records. Record. Where'd it go? I see my tidying up made a little change of what's seen. All right. So I'm going to use the select records tool, which isn't one of the ones that are seen in the getting started palette. But if you enable all tools, you'll be able to see it by default, or you can just search for it using the global search. So using the select records, I'm going to start from record number 3, and I'm going to take everything afterwards. Right, and that's just going to get rid of that read-in record at the start that I had. All right, so we now have all of our records. So the next thing I need to do is just finish preparing my data set for my sentiment analysis. And whenever you're doing actually any analysis project, there's always going to have a little bit of preparation involved. Okay, so I want to go and grab, actually let's bring back all of my tools because I'm missing a couple. There we go. I want to bring back my text to columns. And from my text to columns, I want to take my file name, and from my file name, I want to split out the sentiment for that tool, and I want to bring out the ID for that tool. Right, so give it a name. Actually, I don't want the ID. I'm going to add in a record ID. Right, and the record ID is just so I can go back and reference it later. It's not going to be used for any other analysis. I just want to be able to reference it. Okay. So I'm just going to hit run so we can see what we've got. All right. So I want to take this one, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, so I have 8 columns, and I want to pick out the 7th. I could use a little bit of regex to tidy this up. I'm just going to use the text to columns, looking for a backslash, and create 8 columns. Now I'm going to follow that by just picking that column that I care about. All right, so I'm going to lose record 1, 2, 7. Right, and what I can do is I can highlight all the columns that I want to deselect, move to the select options, and deselect the highlighted fields. So when I run that workflow, It's going to read through, bring them all in. Why did that not read them? Whoops. And I'm supposed to be looking at the file name, not the field name. Right, so just carefully going back and iterating through that process to make sure I'm looking at the right columns and the right values. We can now see at our select on the way through, we want to get rid of 1 to 6 and number 7. We can deselect them. Those missing fields that have come from field 1, which I renamed, I can forget those missing fields. And the last bit is I just want to rename my file name number 7 from the file name into something useful. So I'm going to call that sentiment. So I have my tidied data set. I have the individual text that I want to look at, and I might actually rename field 1 to text. I have the file identifier, which I probably don't need that file name anymore, so I'm just going to unselect that. Unselect that one, and I have that sentiment for that file. So I've prepared my data set and I've got that all ready to go. And I'm going to use one of the features in Alteryx that came in with, I think it was 18.3 or 18.4, which is the cache and run workflow. So it can build a cache at whatever tool you select when you right click it, and just then read from that one point. It's only saving me a couple of seconds at this point, but it's taking me 3.6 seconds. But when you're looking with much larger data sets, much bigger workflows, it can improve that performance and that speed of iteration for you there. All right. So what I want to do now is the first option I want to look at is using the API to do that call, to assign my sentiment. So I've gone to the community. I might actually bring back, there we go. So on the Alteryx community, we have, sorry, not the community, the gallery. On the Alteryx gallery, in the predictive district, all right, in the predictive, where to go, district, there we are, and predictive. So in the predictive district, there is a tool that you can go and collect and download, which is the, there we go, Cognitive Services Text Analysis. All right. So this tool, let's actually do that one. This tool uses the Azure Services API to go and do that text analysis that you want. In order to use this, you need to set yourself up with an Azure Services API account, which is free to set up, and you get the first 5,000 calls free each month. All right. So let's erase that on the screen. So I've downloaded and installed this earlier. If you need to find out how to install macros, you're welcome to reach out to me on Twitter, but we're not going to cover that for now. So we've got in my workflow, I've already installed the Cognitive Services macro. Drag that into my workflow, and I don't need to do any other preparation for it. All right. It's going to have all that information for me. I need to assign the endpoint, and that endpoint is set up in your account. And the last bit I need to do is use my API key, which I have forgotten to grab. So let's give me a moment. I'm going to pause my screen while I grab my API key. All right, I'm just going to pop over to Azure Services. And when I've got the key, I will actually show you the login page for that. What's it doing? Whoops. Come on. Just taking a moment. All right. Copy my key. Okay. So just to show you the information about the screen, let's re-show the screen again. Here we go. So I'm not going to show my keys. I'd rather not have everyone spending up large on my account. But what you have was with the cognitive services, the first 5,000 transactions within a 30-day period, so the first 5,000 records you want to try and do are going to be free. After that, so the first 5,000 are free. The next 25,000 will cost you £149 or £1.49 per thousand. So you can decide how much you want to spend and how much you want to apply to it. If you don't set an account, you'll just get an error message back saying you've used your quota. So you can go for 5,000 free records each month if you want. All right, let's take that one off screen. What's it doing? Come on. All right, there we go. Let's go back to Alteryx. There we go. So I've put in the information that I need into my cognitive services. I've collected an API key, which I've put in there, and there's instructions in the help menu from the Alteryx Cognitive Services tool. And I'm using the WestUS endpoint, which is associated with that free account. And all we do from here is we can go back. I'm going to put a browse on that tool. And using an API endpoint, I need to decide what sort of analysis I want to do. So which field am I going to look at, which is going to be the text field. And what am I going to do? What sort of analysis? We have, by default, 3 different analysis types, which is sentiment analysis, key phrase extraction, and language detection. So you can work out 3 different ways of doing it. I'm just going to go and do sentiment. This time. Oh, did I put in the wrong key? All right. So I've just got an error message back saying I've used an invalid subscription key. So let's just try that one again. I suspect am I going to the right endpoint? Oh dear, let's just check my cheat sheet. It's not the WestUS 2. I'm supposed to be doing just the normal WestUS. So these keys are associated with a specific API endpoint. So if you're not using the right endpoint, you get that error message. When I correct it to the right endpoint, there we go. It's going to pass each of those records, all 222 of them, off to the API. This is going to come back and return me a score. And this score is a value between 1 and 0. Right, so they're all positive values, which you can see here on our Browse Anywhere profile. values above half are considered positive, values below half are considered negative. And we can get a feeling for which ones are going to be right and which one's going to be wrong. There's two things I want to do to finish this one off. I want to apply that sentiment and just to work out how accurate is the default API compared to us. So I'm going to bring in a formula which will use API sentiment, and it's just going to be a v-string. And what I'm going to apply is a check of if sentiment score is greater than 0.5, then positive, else negative, end of. And I'm using the positive and negative just to match to the original value. Okay, let's just make that 3-character string. Next, I want to do another check, which is if sentiment equals API sentiment, then 1, else 0, end of. And that's just returning a true or false value for the sentiment. And the last trick I'm going to use is I'm going to take that correct column, which is a 1 if it's true, a 0 if it's negative, and just take the average of that over my entire data set. And when I take the average of that 1 or 0, it returns effectively a percentage of correct. Right? So it'll give me the accuracy for me. So we can hit run. It's going to go through, rescore all those values. We find out that using the default API that's been defined by Microsoft, about 72% of the time, about 72% of the time, I'm getting a sentiment that's the same as what was defined in my analysis. Right, so that's the first way of doing sentiment analysis. I'm just going to pop this process into a container and turn that one off, save us having to rerun that each time. So using a default API, we can get to an endpoint really quickly without having to do much preparation and work. The second process I want to use is trying to use a dictionary lookup value to work out what my sentiment is. Okay, so in my folder, where'd it go? There we go. I have this file called polarity. Right, it's just sitting in the subjectivity folder. And this file is, if I bring that into Alteryx, there we go. Bring that into Alteryx. Oops. There we go. We have a value of individual words, things like abandoned, abandonment, abandon, abuse, abase, so on and so forth, whether they're positive or negative. Okay. We also have a few that coming through as, where'd we go? I'm sure I saw it. There we go, neutral as well. Right. So different words have a different polarity associated with them. So I'm going to take these values. So first thing I want to do is I'm going to take this prior polarity and assign, if it's negative, I want it to be -1. If it's positive, I want it to be +1. And if it's neutral, I want it to be 0. I think when I did my preparation, I got that polarity score calculation wrong, so I'm just going to update that field. All right. And what this is going to allow me to do is it's going to allow me to take a particular value or a particular word and sum all the individual words to work out how positive or how negative it is. The end result of it is that polarity, that sentiment isn't necessarily going to be between 1 or 0. It's not going to be scaled, but the more positive it is, the more positive it is. So if the value is positive, then the sentiment is positive. If the value is negative, the sentiment is negative. All right. So I want to create a new value, which is going to be if polarity, prior polarity equals negative, then -1. Else if prior polarity equals US positive, then 1, else 0, end if. All right, so we've got why. Because I'm looking at on the way in, there we go. Negative, our positives are positive, and our neutrals, there we go, should be returning as 1. So what I want to do now is I want to take my original data set, but I need to split this data set out to all the individual words and remove all the punctuation from it. Right? So I can get rid of a lot of that errors. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove all my punctuation. Okay. So I'm going to take my text fields. I'm just going to strip out any punctuation. I'm not going to worry about replacing nulls, but I am going to remove any tabs, line breaks, or duplicate white space. They don't actually matter to me at the moment. Okay. That's going to take my original file and tidy it up. I also need to make sure all my words are the same case, because when I do my next step in joining these two data sets together, if they're not the same case, they're not going to line up together. So again, using my data cleansing tool, I'm going to modify case to lowercase. All right. So what we have now is I have my text, but right now it's all an entire sentence. So I want to split out so each individual word is its own record so I can do its own analysis on it. Right. And I'm going to use a text to columns tool. And I'm going to use from my text to columns our split to rows option. Okay. And I'm going to split the text field by the delimiter of \s. I'm just going to look for white space. So if I run that workflow, I end up with a list where each individual word gets its own record. So my record ID for the individual comment and review is noted, but I have all the text for everything there as well. So I now have a way of looking this up and assigning this value to it. So I'm going to go to my join options. I'm going to use a find and replace tool. Okay, and what find and replace will do is it'll look up in a stream of data for a particular field, and it's going to find within that field the value that I care about, the value that I'm looking at, which is going to be the word. And to that column, I'm going to append a brand new record, which is going to be my polarity score. Okay. So when we run that workflow, it's going to go through and it's going to look into our individual values. When it appears in my dictionary list, it's going to apply that score. When it doesn't appear, it just returns a null. Right. And the last step I want to do for this is I just want to find out, summing them all together, which ones are positive, which ones are negative, so they add it all into a value. So I'm going to get my transform, summarize, and I'm going to group by the record ID. Right? So the record ID is the individual comment. I'm going to include the original sentiment just to reference back to it. Right? Group by the sentiment. And I'm just going to sum together all the individual polarity scores. Okay. On the output, there we go. So we can now start seeing how individual comments come back and reply to my overall result. We have record ID number 8, which, what did that one say? Let's have a look. Number 8 made a comment of, this is one of the worst movies ever made. So really negative words have been used about it, and they're really unlike things. And as expected, on our output, we end up with a negative 23 value. Right? So it's the words that they're using in that review are also really negative. Compare that to number 7, which has actually got a positive 7 sentiment analysis. Number 7, right? There are times when finishing a film one. So a lot of the words that he used ended up actually being normally positive words, but they don't turn into a positive sentiment. I could go through and find out which ones are more accurate than others, which ones give me that result. But what I'm finding is this dictionary, if I go through and customize this dictionary a bit more, I might get a better value. But for me, this dictionary doesn't quite work. It doesn't give me the right values. And I can confirm that by doing the similar scoring process as I had earlier. So I'm going to bring in a preparation, formula, sum of score. If, whoops, I don't want the sum of score, I want a new column called correct again. This time just greater than 0. And it wants to be a short string. It's positive, else it's negative. Finish that one off, there we go. And again, summarize to get my average. Oops, forgot to do that check. Let's just rename that. Oh no, that's fine. Correct needs to equal there we go. We want to sum our correct field, which needs to be an integer. We just want to take the average. Average. There we go. And the result of using a dictionary actually ends up to be correct or assigned correctly about 66% of the time. So slightly worse than the generic API endpoint. You can use this endpoint to focus it in on what you're wanting. Right? So if people are talking about something specific and using specific words for your company, you can customize that dictionary to be a little bit better for you. I've just used a default dictionary, hasn't quite worked. But what I want to do now is, obviously, the API is pretty good, but not perfect, but it's good. using a dictionary isn't very good for me at all. Right? So the third option I want to look at is I want to build a custom process completely. So I've just turned off both of those two workflows. I might actually give this one a name, API, and container 2 is dictionary. Right. And this time what I want to do is I want to use a custom workflow to try and work out whether it's positive or negative. Okay. And using the built-in R tools, I'm going to bring that through for me. So the first thing I want to do is you get a lot in the normal text. We're going to get a lot of words which are what are called stop words in natural language processing. Things like of, for, just general English words that are used all the time to make up sentences, but don't actually add any value to the analysis. All right. So I've got from Google in my workflow, there we go. Where did it go? Oh, where did I put my stop words? I forgot to copy it over. All right. So I've copied over from my cheat sheet a file that just has a whole list of words that are really, really common in English, which aren't going to add any value. Right? There are, from this list, if I run that, let's just check, 127 records, so there's 127 different words. You could use a longer list or a shorter list or potentially a customized list and remove things like your product name, your company name, because they're not adding to the value. Right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to filter out from my list of words anything that's appearing in my stop words list. I'm just going to use a join to do that. Right? And from my join, I'm going to take anything in the text field, match it up to stop words. I'm just going to use the left-hand output, so everything that appears in the left that isn't in the right. Right? So we now have all of our individual values. And what I want to do is I want to take this list of words and I want to find the most common words, right? Because I want to build my model just on the most common words, primarily for speed reasons at the moment. If you had a large data set or more records, I've only got a couple hundred, or you've got more time, you can use the full set of words. I'm just going to look at the most common 20 for negative and positive. Right? So I'm going to go through, summarize this data set. So I'm going to group it by sentiment. I'm going to count each individual word. Whoop. I'm also going to group it by word. Right. So for each sentiment and each word, how often does it appear? Right. Now I'm going to go and sort this list. Again, I'm going to sort it by the sentiment. So I have both the sentiments, and I'm going to take the count. Right. So for the negative sentiment, the most common word is actually BR. And I know that BR is actually from the HTML, and that's for a break. So that's probably not a word that I want to include. So I'm going to remove that from my original data set. Right. Text equal does not equal BR. So I'm able to go back and iterate through to make things work and make things logical for the analysis I'm doing. All right. So if they start saying movie or film, it's a really common word of negativity. It might actually appear in the positive as well. If we were doing customizing our stop words a little bit more, that might be something we want to include. Something to go for analysis. But what I want to do is I just want to sample my data source and look for the first 10 rows within each sentiment. Right, so I'm going to take the most common 10 words in each sentiment. So I now have a list of 20 words, 10 positive, 10 negative, right, which does bring back movie and film on both of them. Same with one. So that's probably a keyword that I might want to remove from my data set if I want to customize this a bit further. So I will only want to focus on those 20 records. Okay. I'm going to go back to my original analysis. I'm going to join text to text. I don't need any of the write outputs after I've run it. But I do want to keep the record ID so I can keep them separate. All right, so I've now got my data set, got bad. I could actually drop counts as well, because once I've run that, I don't need it anymore. The last thing I want to get now is I want to do what's called one hot encoding. Right? So what I want to do is I want to have a table which has one record per review, one record per review, and I want one column for each individual text value. All right? And within that matrix, whenever that word appears in a review, I want to have a 1, otherwise it's going to be a 0. Okay? So that's a process called one hot encoding. And I've got a macro here. I just Googled or searched on the Alteryx community for a one hot encoding macro. And that one, yep, there we go. And found this macro called expand field to binary fields. Right? I encourage you to either go and find it yourself or create your own one. Right? But I'm just using this existing macro. It's all about just Googling around to find it. The field that I'm going to transpose is the text. And on the other side, when we run this workflow, we end up with a matrix for the negative, the word, our record, and just a value of true if it's appearing there. Everything else is null. Okay. So the next step we need to do is I need to convert these true values to a 1 and these nulls to a 0. Okay. So I'm going to go and have a multi-field formula. I'm going to take all of my text fields. Nope, they're Boolean fields, sorry. All of my Boolean fields. Select all of them. I don't want to copy them to anything. I want to convert them to an integer. All right. And if current field, then 1, else 0. End if. So just provide the calculation for that. So it's going to go through, and whenever the value is true, right, because this field is a true or false value, so if current field is true, it's going to give us a value of 1, otherwise it's a 0. And I've converted it into an integer just to make it easier for the workflow. All right, now I get to create the original model. Right? So I'm going to go to predictive, and I'm just going to make a simple logistic regression model. Okay, I'm going to go through. So logistic regression, the target variable is sentiment. I'm going to select all of my fields except for record ID and text. Right, so that's sentiment and my matrix. Whoops. Let's just stop that momentarily because I need to put a browse on to my output. And that process there is it's taken our individual model, it's built that out, and it's now using a logistic regression to assign whether if one of those 20 words that I've looked at, which ended up being consolidated into 17 different words, if one of those 17 words appears, how does that predict my original value? How does that bring back that first check? All right. It'll take a moment. There we go. That took 36 seconds, which is not too bad. Let's make that full screen. And that process is run through and calculated and worked out. It's just trying to build my report. And it's now created my table, right? Because I've only used a subsample of data, my accuracy actually ends up being even worse than my table, right? Because I haven't provided enough information for it. I haven't done enough work to make it. My precision, so how many times I predict true, do I actually get the true? How many of the actual positives do I return? My precision is pretty poor, again. My recall, which is how many, which way around is that one? How many of the actual true values, true predictions do I get right? No, it's the other way around, sorry. Precision is of the true values, how many did I predict? Of the correct predictions, how many did I get right? Recall is of the actual true values, how many did I get back? Which is really poor. Right. But we're just trying to find this out. Okay. Generally, in this case, the model's not that great. Right? But you can go through and do other processes to refine it. Right? And then using that custom model, we can go back and make modifications and updates and better prepare it. All right, we're running out of time, so let's pop back to our presentation. Come back here. Come on. Why is this not coming across? There we go. Whoops. All right, it's just loading this one up. Oh, why is that not going anywhere? There we go. So we've created that model now. Right, so what are some of the things that we could do to improve that model? Right? We could customize the original dictionary. So our lookup values, we can modify that to include the values we care about a bit more, get rid of the ones that we don't, so it more reflects what we're talking about. We could, instead of using a default dataset to record against, we can build our own labeled corpus of information. Right? A corpus just being the reviews, being that text information. We can do what's called stemming of the words. Right? And what stemming is it's taking the root of a word. So if we had run or running or runner, they're all built off the same base part of the word, and that base part of the word is probably what's giving you your sentiment. I can get a bigger data set. I only used 100 records to do my prediction here. If I went to the IMDb report and the IMDb list, there's actually a full 50,000 records of positive and negative reviews. If I use that full data set, I'm going to get a more accurate model. It's going to take me longer to build the model, but the model ends up more accurate. I could go and try a different set of models, right? I could use things like decision trees to do my analysis, or random forest trees. Or I could go and use deep learning and building neural networks to try and decide on what the model should look like. But all these processes, let's pop back on, all these processes are just customizing and preparing what you're doing. None of these will make any impact to using an API. That's just as it is. You can't improve that API any further, but the API is really quick and really easy to do. I don't have to train it, I don't have to build it, I don't have to prepare the data. I just give it to the API and it does it all for me. The other ones, it's going to be a lot more custom to our own situation and our own result. All right. Thank you very much for everyone for attending. Again, that's my contact details. I'm going to open up to questions and answers if anyone wants them, but I'm going to stop the recording. So Q&A is just for everyone that's shown up today. So thank you very much and cheers.